Hello everyone and welcome back to TowerGate. It is TowerGate day 611, 611. Sunday, November 18th, 2018. Thank you so much for tuning in. Another one of those very important TowerGate videos this morning. We're about to get to it. Let me cover a few breaking news topics first and we'll get right into the important part of today's TowerGate video. Okay, Andrew Gillum has conceded again, which means DeSantis has won the governor race in Florida again. Let's hope this time it's final. Congratulations, Florida, on Governor DeSantis, and I'm pretty sure Governor Scott. The death toll right now in California, 71 dead. 9,700 homes completely destroyed, 12,263 structures destroyed completely, 1,011 people still unaccounted for. But you can rest assured that the warbler and the spotted owl are doing fine. Trump will submit the answers to the questions given to him by Uncle Bob next week, or I should say this upcoming week. As you know, I think this is a bad idea. You all know how I feel about the Mueller investigation and how it should have been handled from the very get-go. Unfortunately, I am not on Trump's legal team. So what's going on here? Trump's too smart to fall into this trap. And by the way, these questions were not answered by lawyers. They were answered by him. He answered the questions himself. He says his lawyers had no role to play in his answering the questions. He's certainly going to pass it along to them. They're going to look over it before they pass it to Mueller. But he says he answered the questions himself. What's going on here? Well, Trump is awfully damn smart to fall into this kind of a trap. So I'm thinking it's possible. I don't know this. It's possible. One of two things. Either Trump has been given some assurance that if he answers these questions, this will be the end of the Mueller investigation. And he probably would have been given that assurance from Rodenstein, which is why Rodenstein is still around. Or Trump honestly believes and knows, as we all do, they had nothing to do with colluding with the Russians. And he believes that he can answer these questions and not leave anything there for Uncle Bob to go after. And he feels confident enough to roll the dice. Very risky move. Because all Uncle Bob has to do is find any one of the individuals he's questioned, and he's probably questioned hundreds, who has made any statement that is contradictory to something Trump says in his answers, and that would be enough for Uncle Bob to say, well, I have a contradiction here. Trump says this other witness I interviewed says this. I believe the other witness. I think Trump's lying. And off Uncle Bob goes to the court to get a subpoena to force Trump to testify in front of a grand jury, which could then be turned into another 2-year-long debacle, which will no doubt result in Democrats holding an impeachment vote in the House. Unlikely it would pass in the Senate unless they actually can drum up enough support or enough of a media campaign to drive his approval ratings down into the 20s and force him to resign. It's a very risky move, and I don't know the answer to this question. Whether or not he's been given some assurance that if he answers the questions, that will wrap up the investigation. I have a rough time believing that Uncle Bob would agree to that. Whether or not Rodenstein would try to cut that type of a deal, I don't know. It depends on who has the most leverage. Because Rodenstein has leverage and Trump has leverage. And Uncle Bob right now is the most powerful man in the country. More powerful than the president, clearly. By the power invested in him by Rodenstein. We'll get back to a more in-depth discussion about that here in a few moments. Emmanuel Macron. He's now so unpopular, I am not sure if Macron is going to last for his entire term. His latest boondoggle was in the height of his unpopularity. He's pretty much hovering in the, I understand, the low 30s. Very, very unpopular. A lot of people starting to hit the streets against Macron. And what does he do? He drops a fuel tax. A fuel tax. Will that be the last straw to drive him down into the low 20s? And I'm not sure of how things work in France, whether they can have a recall or an impeachment or what you do. But it's pretty clear that Macron's popularity in France is falling to, I mean, it doesn't get much lower than low 30s, high 20s. This fuel tax is bringing people out into the streets. They've got a lot of problems there. It'll be very interesting to watch Macron as he is literally trying to move in on Angela Merkel's old territory. He wants to be the head guy. I think he's completely clueless, about how things work there at the EU. I don't understand it unless he's been given some assurances or something. Oh, we lost Merkel. You're our next guy. You got to step up and carry the torch. Maybe there's a deal being cut between him and the EU. Who knows what's going on behind closed doors in that horribly corrupt globalist organization. But clearly there are storm clouds on the horizon as the populist movement continues to sweep all across Europe from the western coast of Europe all the way through to the Mediterranean. You're seeing it happen all throughout the continent. And the EU is clearly in very bad condition. They're on life support. Merkel's been taken down. Macron is now extremely low in popularity, to say in the least. His fuel tax is probably going to be the straw that breaks the camel's back. We, of course, see what's happening over in the UK with that horrible deal that Theresa May tried to drop on the citizens of the UK. They're rebelling big time. She's even had members of her own party who have not endorsed it. It clearly doesn't accomplish Brexit. In fact, it actually sets up a situation where the only way they actually get out of Brexit is if the EU gives them permission. It may be the worst deal in history. And it's emboldening the Conservative Party. So a lot of things are shaking, rattling, and rolling across Europe right now. And it's all going to come to heads here within, I would say, the next 6 to 12 months. We know that Merkel will be leaving here in the not-too-distant future. Macron trying to make a move to step into her position, but he's losing popularity so quickly at home, it's hard to believe he'll be able to last. I don't know I don't know what you do to get rid of a president there. They usually just indict him for some crimes and to get rid of him. But we'll see what happens, and we'll keep watching on the European front. Papadopoulos has tweeted again, quote the following: "Soon I will expose the biggest political scandal in modern history." Soon I will expose the biggest political scandal in modern history. We'll see. We will certainly see. He's dying to testify, but apparently he's not getting any invitations. I wonder why. Mr. Misfit, he wants to come and tell his story. And you know who they're trying to get him to tell a story to? The Senate Judiciary Committee. The Senate Judiciary Committee, the current Senate Judiciary Committee, which we know is the most deep state there is. Now, after the midterms, or after the first of the year, Lindsey Graham will be in charge. So I think if they're going to get him in there, they're going to get him in there before. But something tells me maybe Lindsey Graham is aware of this, and I hope he's on Maria Bartiromo in the morning and she asked him about this. Hope someone asked him about this. But the House Intelligence Committee, the House Oversight Committee, they're wanting to, Goodlatte is wanting to get Loretta Lynch and Comey in. Maybe he should get Misfit in. He'll get a lot more out of Misfit. Misfit wants to come and talk. Comey and Lynch aren't going to come and talk. They're going to come and do what they always do. Nothing. Going to give you nothing. Misfit wants to give you something. Papadopoulos wants to give you something. Carter Page will tell you his story. Michael Caputo will tell you his story. We'll see if they want to talk to them. Let's take a look at where we are with the Mueller investigation before I get into some other things. So at this time, Uncle Bob the Executioner has framed Michael Flynn and got him to plead guilty to one count of making false statements. His sentencing date has been pushed back 5 times. The next date that's out there is December the 18th. We will see if the sentencing hearing actually happens, or if they'll try a 6th attempt at sentencing. Michael Flynn has stated that he had to agree to pleading guilty to making false statements because he simply said financially it wasn't possible to continue fighting. Then we have Papadopoulos, who pled guilty to lying or misleading the FBI, lying to the FBI, specifically about the when he actually met with Misfit. He said he met with him before he joined the Trump team, when actually he had met with him or spoken to him or communicated with him after he joined the Trump team. And of course, he has been sentenced to 14 days in jail, which he is supposed to be serving here in the very near future. But now he has dumped his 2 previous lawyers, which he had to by procedure. He's got 2 new lawyers, and they have just pled in recent court filing to reverse his guilty plea. It's a ballsy move. But that is what he's done. We don't know what the result of that is. But of course, Papadopoulos is saying he was framed. He's tweeting out constantly. He's saying he will expose the scandal. We have Manafort, who struck a deal with Mueller, again, because he couldn't continue to go on fighting the deep state with a never-ending budget, which would just keep digging and digging. It didn't help that his partner, Rick Gates, dropped the dime on him. So Manafort has struck a deal on charges of bank fraud and tax evasion, which are totally unrelated to the 2016 campaign. Mueller is still working over Manafort to try to squeeze him to get him to compose a tune. Rick Gates pled guilty to making false statements and conspiracy. He has been cooperating with Mueller to get Manafort. He is still said to be cooperating. He has not had a sentencing date yet. Michael Cohen pled guilty to tax evasion and bank fraud, and some election violations as well. The case has been turned over to the Southern District of New York for further investigation and sentencing. Roger Stone is currently under investigation. Stone says he will not cooperate with Mueller, that he has cooperated enough. There's nothing more he has to say. He says he's done nothing illegal. But just about everyone expects he's going to be indicted. Carter Page, not indicted, despite the fact that he was the very beginning of all this. He has now filed a lawsuit, civil suit, or a slander suit, essentially, against the DNC, the Democratic National Committee, and Perkins Coie. He's also agreed to come and testify in front of Congress and tell his story. We have the lawyer, the Dutch lawyer, who also pled guilty to a process crime of misleading the FBI, and I believe he got like a 30-day jail sentence and a fine, having nothing to do with the 2016 election or Trump-Russia collusion. We have the Concord Management and the 12 Russian trolls. That case just recently was given the okay to move on from the judge hearing the case, who was a Trump-appointed judge, by the way. So that case continues. Blasey Ford. Her GoFundMes have now total over $1 million. $1 million. And she is apparently still fielding book and movie deals. Book and movie deals. How much do you think Blasey Ford will end up pocketing after all this is over? Certainly will be in the multi-millions of dollars, because she has never shut down the GoFundMe. It's still going. She's now over $1 million. She's taking offers for book deals and movie deals. She's going to be a very wealthy woman. She says she needed the money for security and lodging and travel expenses. I thought she was afraid to fly. I wonder how much traveling she would. Maybe she was talking about the traveling she had to do to go visit her friend, the FBI, career FBI person who she coached on how to beat a lie detector, who probably recruited her to be the one to launch the allegations against Kavanaugh. It's probably who we're talking about. And if that's her, I doubt that her friend charged her to come and stay with her for 2 weeks. I'm pretty sure her friend didn't charge her for that. I don't know how much security she needs. I mean, this whole thing's done and over. No one cares about Blasey Ford. I doubt there's anyone threatening her. She lives in a highly liberal area of the country. She's probably a hero at the beach with her beach friends. I doubt she's facing any type of security threats whatsoever. Of course, she didn't have to worry about legal fees because her lawyers were representing her pro bono, meaning they were being paid for by nefarious Democrats. These guys don't work for free. Probably the rotten Reverend Clinton and people associated with her probably footing the bill, paying these lawyers, would be my guess. These guys don't work for free. So there you go. Blasey Ford is cashing in, just like I told you she would. That's what she got out of it. And as I said, she'll probably get a cushy job in some Ivy League left-wing school when she's done finishing up running the mind control program there at that university she works at now. Did you know that Beto O'Rourke's father is a billionaire real estate developer named William D. Sanders? That's right. Beto O'Rourke's father-in-law is a billionaire real estate developer named William D. Sanders. And there's quite the story about how they worked together to get some things done back when Mr. Sanders was trying to get some property that he wanted to develop on. He was running into some problems. Beto O'Rourke apparently assisted him on the political level, and I guess that's how the relationship began. He eventually married Sanders' daughter, so daddy-in-law is a billionaire. Never knew that. Now, the main point of today's video. As most of you have ascertained from the last couple videos I've done, I am very, very frustrated at why Trump has not declassified these documents. 2 times he said we'd declassify documents and he ends up backing out. We're watching the deep state coup as it moves forward. We know the Democrats are getting ready to take over on January 3rd, and we know what's going to happen then. As I told you, I've been perplexed about this. What in the world is going on? Something's not adding up. This doesn't sound like someone with a plan. And that doesn't sound like Trump, because he's always got a plan. So I've been digging and digging for the past 3 days to try to find out what the hell is going on. And now, my friends, I am going to tell you what the hell is going on. Pay close attention. The DOJ, Rodenstein, and Uncle Bob the Executioner knew that they never had anything on Trump and that the entire Trump-Russia collusion was a hoax. They knew that from day one, as I stated in yesterday's video. But what they've done is that they have filed a motion. What they did, they filed a motion on October the 12th of 2018. This was done by Uncle Bob the Executioner and the DOJ, Department of Justice. That would be Rodenstein. On October 12th, 2018, they filed a request with the court, something known as the nuclear option. They filed a request with the court to block Trump from declassifying documents sensitive to the Mueller investigation. Specifically, that Carter page FISA 20 pages that, as we're told by Nunes, blows open the entire Trump-Russia collusion hoax. And the reason they filed this motion with the court is because, as they advised the court, Rodenstein advised Trump that if you declassify that information, the DOJ and Uncle Bob will now have the ability to file an obstruction charge against Trump for interfering in the Mueller investigation by declassifying these documents, which Uncle Bob and the Department of Justice deem sensitive to the Mueller investigation. And so they went to the court on October 12, 2018 and said, we think the president wants to declassify this. This would be very detrimental to the current ongoing investigation and would likely be an effort to derail the investigation. And we would consider that an act of obstruction. And we are here to make it known to the court that if Trump declassifies, we will have already informed the court that we would view that as obstruction and we would act accordingly. If Trump declassifies these documents, they will move forward with obstruction. That will likely lead, now that the Democrats have control of the House, likely lead to the cause for the impeachment hearings, and they will certainly pass that. They'll get all the Democrats to go along with every single one, which will be about 230 something. That's all they need. And then it would go to the Senate. And if in fact Uncle Bob and the DOJ get an injunction from the federal court because of the previous application they filed, advising the court that this would be obstruction and that Trump has been advised as such, if he declassifies, moving on it anyway, he will then fall right into the trap of being set up for obstruction, which would lead to impeachment and his being forced from office. There you go. So from the very beginning, just as I said, from day one, Uncle Bob the Executioner was brought in. Remember, Comey is fired on May the 9th. On May the 10th, Rodenstein shows up at Trump's office with Uncle Bob to recommend him to replace Comey. We've also had rumors that in the week that Comey was fired, he had conversations with Uncle Bob and likely Rodenstein. So then a week later, Trump fires Comey. The next day, Rodenstein tries to get Mueller in there. A week later, Rodenstein names Uncle Bob the Executioner as the special counsel. In other words, he's simply replacing Comey. Because what did Rodenstein's appointment say? I read it for you. Remember? It said that Uncle Bob's role now was to continue the investigation. The deep state organized an attempted coup. They tried to destroy Trump as a candidate. That didn't work. So they set up the insurance policy. Mueller himself is actually an insurance policy as well. I don't know if it's the same thing or part of the insurance policy, but certainly looks like part of it. So when they realized that Trump had won the election, they had to come up with some way of making sure that he could not expose their crimes, because he said he was going to drain the swamp, and they are the swamp, and they know all the horrible things that they did that will put many of them in jail for probably the rest of their lives. Many at the DOJ, FBI, the intelligence community, foreign governments, the Rotten Reverend, and many others. So they brought in Uncle Bob. Uncle Bob's job was never to find Trump-Russia collusion, because they knew there wasn't any. His job was simply to have the investigation until the Democrats could impeach Trump. Now, he was hoping he would find something that he could give the Democrats, and hoping that they would win the Congress. Well, they won half of it. They won the House. But the Republicans gained in the Senate. So unless they have some really, they're not going to be able to do a political type of removal from office. They will actually have to have a lawful removal of office, because they actually need a crime at this point. Otherwise, you won't get 2/3 of the Republicans in the Senate to go along with it. So they got half of what they want, but they needed it all. So by having Uncle Bob the executioner, just having the investigation, that's all that matters. Just that there is an ongoing investigation. And the fact that he could never find Trump-Russia collusion is the reason that he had to go after all these gadflies, like Roger Stone, Papadopoulos, Michael Cohen, Manafort. He had to go dig up something to justify his existence, even if he had to go for tax crimes, fraud crimes, going back 10, 15 years, perjury traps, whatever it took. He just has to keep the investigation going and keep Democrats hoping and believing he's actually very close to proving that Trump worked with the Russians to steal the election from the Rotten Reverend Clinton. They only have to present that and get people to believe it, and they have been successful at that, because the media runs the propaganda for them. They are the propaganda wing of the plot, which we're talking about. So there was never any Uncle Bob, the DOJ, they knew there was never anything having to do with Trump-Russia collusion. They knew it was a hoax from day one. The purpose of the investigation was simply to have the investigation. And now, knowing good and well that Trump would eventually get frustrated, they have put in place a situation where if he tries to do anything to end the investigation, which means even all this time he was tweeting out to Jeff Sessions about the fact that he was frustrated that Sessions wasn't investigating all this stuff. The fact that he continues to tweet out. Now he's got Whitaker in there. He continues to tweet this stuff out. But even Whitaker probably cannot do anything. Because then they would simply say, well, Trump put Whitaker in, who we know doesn't like Uncle Bob in the investigation. And therefore, if Whitaker tries to curtail the Mueller investigation, they can simply go after Whitaker. And Trump as well. They can say, well, Trump put Whitaker in to take out Uncle Bob, to shut down his investigation. That's obstruction. And off to the federal courts they will go to prove that it was obstruction. And that will, if nothing else, allow Uncle Bob to continue the witch hunt until 2020, when they can see if they can defeat him again. And if not, they'll find some more stuff in the next election to keep it going to 2024. What they must do, and this is the plot, they must tie Trump's hands and keep him, they must tie Trump's hands and prevent him from being able to expose their crimes. And they do that by continuing the investigation, because any attempt to curtail the investigation would be obstruction. But the only way to be able to expose the crimes is to end the investigation. Because until the investigation ends, until the Mueller investigation ends, all the evidence that Trump needs to prove what they did is considered sensitive to the Mueller investigation. Uncle Bob is protecting the evidence which would be the evidence which would convict all his deep state friends for the crimes they committed. So Uncle Bob is really there to protect against an investigation which would reveal the real crimes. He's protecting the evidence. He's the man who's got his arms around the evidence, protecting it. Got a bear hug on it. And if Trump attempts to get to that evidence, Uncle Bob simply says, hey, this is sensitive to my investigation. Rodenstein says, hey, you can't look at that. That's part of Uncle Bob's investigation. And if you try, that's obstruction. If you try to end the Mueller investigation, that's obstruction. You see? They can leverage obstruction against Trump, against the evidence he needs. That is why Trump cannot declassify those documents. Because he's been told by Rodenstein, if you do, we've already gone to court and informed the court that that would be obstruction. And we will move forward and file an obstruction charge, and you'll likely find yourself in front of a grand jury if you direct Mr. Whitaker to curtail the investigation, cut funding on the investigation, end the investigation, or interfere in any way. We'll consider that obstruction. Because what they must do is make sure that Trump is never allowed to reveal the evidence. That is why they would not give it to Jordan. They will not give it to Graham. They will not give it to anybody. Because any attempt to get the information that would reveal their crimes will be considered part of Uncle Bob's investigation, would be damaging to Uncle Bob's investigation, would put his investigation into jeopardy, would reveal classified information that are pertinent to his investigation, and therefore they'll be willing to go to court to fight the Congress or anyone else who attempts to get their hands on the evidence which would incriminate the real perpetrators. So now we know why Trump cannot declassify those documents. What do you think about that? Does Trump risk it? Does he say, the hell with you? I'm going to declassify it anyway. And you can go to the judge and you can try to get me for obstruction and I'll fight you in court. Then what happens? Everything goes into turmoil. And who knows what follows. Mr. Whitaker could throw himself on the sword. He could declassify that stuff, release that stuff in the Mueller investigation, tell Mueller to wrap it up, cut funding, do whatever, in which case they would go after him for obstructing the investigation on behalf of Trump. In which case he could fall on the sword and say, I was just trying to end the Mueller investigation because I don't think there's anything there. It's been going on way too long. I told him to shift into these fraud charges, tax fraud, bank fraud from other people, what Stone didn't do, whatever. Give it to the authorities in whatever district. And in the Mueller investigation, it was supposed to be about Trump-Russia. There's nothing there. It's over. And that's exactly why I told Mueller to end the investigation. As far as ever discussing that with the president, I never did. I made this decision totally on my own. In which case, he falls on the sword. He probably walks away, but his career at the DOJ is over. His career probably in practicing law is probably over. His life's destroyed. He's probably got millions of dollars in legal bills and the deep state going after him for the rest of his life. He'd be a patriot, but he'd be a lame duck patriot, and we'd be in chaos. Thank you for tuning in. I'll very much look forward to your comments in the comments section. Guys, have a good night. See you. Bye.